The Vietnam War and its Legacy. First Blood is a 1982 cinema blockbuster that follows protagonist John Rambo, a man that is confused about his role in society, his identity, and his purpose after the war. As a character, Rambo is based off interviews with veterans and a literary case study of a Green Beret soldier. First Blood's connection to reality is that it depicts the Vietnam War, a civil conflict that was transformed into an international battle in the midst of the Cold War, as America saw communism as a threat and decided to assist the south of Vietnam with manpower, whilst the Soviet Union supported the north of Vietnam with weapons to avoid an actual physical conflict between the two power states. In conclusion, the war was seen to be a global failure, no ground was gained, social movements were on the rise, and 57,000 soldiers didn't return home. The film has a distinct message about war, as Rambo's portrayal as an anti-hero is a direct reference to how the veterans felt when they returned home. The movie highlights how lives were ruined by the war through the constant traumatic reminders the protagonist faces, from the death of his friends to his violent flashbacks. As a character, Rambo is agnostic to the rights or wrongs of what he has participated in, constantly referring back to the phrase, "they drew first blood," as a justification. The characterization of the sheriff is a reproduction of the chilly reception the soldiers received on arrival from the people they thought they were fighting for. It is important to note that in the book, Rambo kills hundreds of people and actually commits suicide in the end. However, the script was amended by Stallone, a co-writer who didn't want to portray veterans as crazy, unstable, or having no purpose in society, but rather a strong group of individuals who can overcome their demons. As a companion reading to the film, I read Isaac's 1997 book, Vietnam Shadows, The War, Its Ghosts and Its Legacy, specifically focusing on Chapter 2, The Veterans. The book goes into the Vietnam syndrome and loss of trust in the government of the time, the social isolation of returning soldiers, the soldier resentment to protesters, and post-traumatic stress and mental illness that came home with the veterans. In the simplest of ways, this reading influenced how I identified these themes within the movie. Rather than seeing a young, inexperienced police officer questioning authority, I recognized Vietnam syndrome and a loss of trust in leading bodies. After the Vietnam War, Vietnam syndrome became a widely recognized social movement in which citizens of the US and the global community began to question whether it was justifiable to become involved in overseas military conflicts without public consensus. They also began to question whether leaders of the world had their interests at heart or whether they just wanted money, power, and more territory. Directors and producers used the setting of the wilderness within the movie as a direct reference to the environment of the Vietnam War and to represent the social isolation of returning soldiers. The Vietnam veterans had a very different experience to previous war heroes of the past. They came home to find a divided nation. There were no rallies, parades, or celebrations, but rather a large percentage of the community that treated them like savage or aggressive individuals who partook in one of the most debated wars in US history. Rambo's resentment to the people who judged him can be seen as a reference to the friction between different social classes of the time, as most veterans were from the working class, whilst anti-war protesters were generally college students or from the middle and upper-class families who avoided service. Soldiers believed that they didn't have a right to be protesting something they didn't understand. Lastly, the whole film elucidates the PTSD and mental illness soldiers faced in and after the war. A study of 1985 showed that 40% of Vietnam veterans were unemployed, as well as 41% of the individuals from this group served or who were still serving time in jail at the time of the study. However, these statistics do not elucidate the amount of suicides, victims of Agent Orange, and veterans who now have severe to moderate substance addictions, all of which are the legacy of the Vietnam War.